Good evening. Welcome to the planning board meeting of January 7th, 2025. Hybrid meeting. I will take attendance for those that are in person. Linda Miller,
Here.
Abby Flanagan,
Here.
Pat Nelson,
Here I am.
and I think Sue Felshin, you're on board.
Here.
Thought Andrew was going to be here or Rob, but if they come in, we'll welcome them in. So anyways, we'll get started. Our first item on the agenda is 300 to 310 Baker Avenue, recommendation to the ZBA from Horace Holdings.
So the board got a draft recommendation letter. Since that time,
Rob Almeida is not going to.
I did get comments from Linda and minor edits, a couple of questions from Linda as well as Sue. I'm going to share my screen and run through along with some for each of the site plan findings. What was not in the draft that you got, which I will go through in this draft, is an actual, if the board agrees, the actual finding, recommended finding that the planning board is making to the Board of Appeals. So, give me a second. I'm so used to having two screens now that I can't even handle one screen anymore. It's pretty sad. Okay, so the version that I'm using right now, I think, is the edits that Sue provided, which mirror most of Linda's as well, but I will marry the two as far as commas, grammar, and sentence structure. So I won't bother going through all of those. There's also some edits from the that I received from the applicant, which mirror many of the corrections, but the first edit, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, the actual square footage of the existing building is 414,000. And so the first substantial comment. So this morning we received the comment letter from the outside consultants, where predominantly all of the issues and concerns have been addressed. There were some minor plan revisions that need to be made that the consultant recommended just being a condition of approval, which I've reflected that in this draft that I will show you. So in this letter, it would be, the letter dated January 6th, which is what I left highlighted. Then there was definitely some formatting issues with the table, which caused some confusion, and that was towards the end. So this corrects some duplicate language that was in the formatting, so that the table is now correct. I don't know if that's, I know Linda, you had questions about the table. Kevin, the consultant for the applicants here, if you want him to go through this, just to provide a little bit more explanation or detail about the requested parking and the analysis.
I guess I just was trying to figure out if we're giving relief for 54 or there'll be 50. I wasn't essentially I wasn't exactly sure that everything added up, but if you tell me that it does.
So the building
good.
commissioner sat down with Kevin
Okay,
and went over the parking analysis and agreed with the parking analysis.
okay.
So I don't know if you want Kevin to,
Probably be faster just to ask him. It'll probably take a minute and a half to just
sure, if you want
walk
to
the table and make sure we're.
explain, like, go through the table a little bit more, Kevin, or one more time. And have it up here on the screen.
Elizabeth, can you expand your screen, or is that as big as it'll go?
So the table begins on page 3. It starts by stating that per the building inspector's determination, the required parking for the existing building is 1505. Because we're reducing a portion of that building by demolition, it reduces the requirement for 38 parking spaces, bringing the total required parking for the property to 1486 spaces. And then on page 4, we look at how we get to those required parking spaces. There's a total of 1,361 parking spaces, existing surface parking spaces on the property. We subtract from that 1,361 the 293 parking spaces that would be on Lot B for the comprehensive permit land. We subtract the 7 parking spaces that are lost to get the vehicular transition from Lot A to Lot B. We subtract the 7 parking spaces that would be lost based upon the proposed recommendations that will be before the Board of Appeals on this Thursday night. And then we add the 54 parking spaces that we would be constructing. That would bring the total surface parking on the property to 1108. That includes 21 handicap parking spaces, which meets the requirement for handicap parking spaces. Then we add to that 1101 the fact that 310 has the exclusive use of 83 parking spaces on the property at 320 Baker Ave, which is the Marriott Hotel. That's a previous agreement that was approved by the planning board in the town. They also had the joint agreement to use 92 parking spaces on the 320 Baker Ave property. And we are adding to that a proposed agreement, which we're asking the Board of Appeals to approve, where the property at 310 would have the right to use 21 of the parking spaces on the comprehensive permit site. That brings the total proposed surface parking to 1304. And if the Board of Appeals grants the requested release of 182 parking spaces, that would bring the total to the 1486, which is the required number. I can go through some of the rationale about the relief of 182 parking spaces, but essentially the bottom line is we had Vanessa Hagan do a traffic study in June of 23. They determined that was over 800 vacant parking spaces. I redid that count in September of this year just to recheck, and I found more vacant parking spaces than Vanessa Hagan did. So even after you adjust out for things like vacancy within the existing building and other adjustments out of that 800 parking spaces, we anticipate that there'll be over 500 vacant parking spaces when the office building is complete. Right now, there's some vacancies in it. So we think that the reduction of 182 is very conservative, and that down the road, we might address further reduction of parking, although in some instances, it's been suggested we should keep it for other purposes, some of which is the fire department has training at the site because it's a large open site, and other things of that nature. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, that's great.
And
I thought it was 130 and I couldn't figure.
then Kevin, how do we rationalize the adjustment based upon the zoning laws then? And I understand what you said, and I get that, I guess, but I'm looking at this as a more gestalt approach to parking, okay? So here we have this development that is underutilized in terms of parking, based upon the 2 studies you did. And yet we have to grant a special condition to accommodate what you're asking for. Does that make sense?
I think the biggest difference is, and keep in mind that at one point in time, I owned several small office buildings in the town of Concord. Tenants that occupy 5,000 square feet or less occupy that space really intensively. And
Okay.
tenants that occupy 20,000 or more square feet, our biggest tenant occupies 84,000 square feet, don't begin to use the space as intensively as your small office building. So there's really a significant spread in that. And then one other thing that affects the parking slightly, but not significantly, is our cafeteria. And in the application, we spelled out the hours that we're open. We're not open on Saturday and Sunday. We're not a restaurant. But we provide parking as if the cafeteria was a full restaurant. So one of the things we did at the suggestion of the town planner and the building commissioner is on 2 different days this past fall, we requested everybody that bought food at the cafeteria to say whether they were employed in the building or came from off-site. We didn't care whether they walked or brought a car. We just wanted to know, are you employed here or are you off-site? And I don't remember the exact numbers, but they were in the application also. And it was something like 20-odd people came from off-site. And even if they came in 2 or 3 people in a car, they're talking about 10, 12 cars. But we provide, and I forget the exact number without looking at the application, we provide approximately 100 parking spaces for the cafeteria. So it's like a double, but it's the intensity of office use and the fact that the cafeteria really isn't a restaurant per se.
Okay, thank you.
Evan, can I just ask you, and you can sit down if you want, but, so when, in the bigger buildings, I just want to make sure I understand this, in the bigger buildings where you have, the reason it's not so intensively used is because there are larger lobby spaces and larger hallway spaces. And so parking is based on square footage, not on the number of actual employees that can be in the building.
Right, it's based upon the gross floor area of the building. So it includes everything inside the outside perimeter walls.
Okay.
And you can break it down a little bit, and we have broken it down for the building commissioner. So if you have an area that's really designated as storage, you calculate that. And you calculate use of different areas within the building, but it's every square foot within the building.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so starting with the findings. Starting with the findings, this is again highlighted. I will add the date of the letter, and then this is the section I was talking about as far as oops. Far as the actual finding that the board is recommending with the incorporation of recommended conditions, the planning board believes the proposed project has been adequately designed for the protection of adjoining premises against seriously detrimental uses by provision for surface water drainage, sound and site buffers and preservation of views, light and air. So that type of finding is reflected in each one of these, except for waste disposal, since you're talking about, this is demolition and it's not affecting, waste disposal at all, but, and so that's, I don't know what I did, but these were highlighted. There you go. So each one of these blue sections would be that appropriate finding, should the planning board believe that is your recommendation. Again, except for waste, method of disposal, refuse and waste. They're demolishing a building, they're not adding to the waste stream at all. And then same with each blue finding, should the board agree, is made for each one of the site plan criteria. We get down to H, which planning board believes that the proposed plan incorporates sufficient sustainability and resilience principles through the infiltration of stormwater, additional floodplain compensatory storage, and the installation of additional EV charging stations. And then for the conditions, the added condition would be prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall revise the plans in accordance with the town's outside consultant's letter dated January 6, 2025, and submit the revised plans to the town's outside consultant and CPW Engineering Division for review and approval. And that takes care of those. And if there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different conditions in that letter that require some minor plan changes. So that's all I have.
Comments from the board?
And Sue has her hands up.
Oh, all right. So,
Hi. Excuse me, small question, Elizabeth. I went through the second version of the outside consultant's letter that you sent out today, and I noticed that there were quite a few items where they were recommending that this be done and that be done, and the other be done prior to construction or prior to some other thing. Do we need to add those as conditions to the approval, or some of them seemed like yes, but I'm not the expert on that.
So that is what this new condition 11 would address. So
Okay, sorry, I completely overlooked that. Got it.
no, that's what I just added about 20 minutes ago.
Excellent.
any other comments from the board? Any public comments on this item? No?
No, nobody has their hand up.
No, okay. We'll see none then. I would ask for a,
Would be a motion to
thanks.
recommend
Yeah, thanks.
the Board of Appeals grant the special permit and the site plan based on the board's letter as amended this evening.
I make a motion that in regards to the application, the recommendation to the ZBA for 300 to 310 Baker Ave. For a special permit and site plan review under zoning bylaw section 7.2, 7.7, 11.6, and 11.8. That we make a positive recommendation to the zoning board of appeals as outlined in our letter dated January 7th.
January 8th. By the time I did
January
it. And with the amendments.
with the amendments as proposed.
I second the motion.
Thank you. So I will take a roll call. Rob Almeida?
Can I have a question? I'll just ask a quick question about that. Does that enable the town planner to make any changes that the water and sewer department might make between now and Thursday night?
So should the water, there was questions about some of the conditions water and sewers recommended. So those will be reflected in this letter. But should water and sewer provide additional comments to the Board of Appeals before Thursday night's meeting? Then the board would amend the conditions in their
So the
decision.
Board of Appeals would do that?
Yes.
Okay, super, thank you very much.
No problem.
Did we mean to
Well,
take public comment? I know we're not required to.
Yeah, I
We
asked
did.
for public comments. Thank you.
Ah.
No problem.
Yes.
Pat Nelson,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes,
Yes.
Mark Giddings is a yes as well. Sue,
Yes,
thank you. So that passes, and we'll pass it along to the zoning board of appeals. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank
you. Good night.
So next on the agenda, we're gonna talk about parking again.
Agenda is-
Oh, public comment, sorry.
That's okay.
Do we have any public comment? And it has to be items that are not on this evening's agenda and limited to 3 minutes apiece. See anybody?
Nope.
Seeing no hands raised, we'll move on to potential zoning bylaw parking requirement amendment discussions. So there's two things there, that you obviously received from Elizabeth. Let's deal with the easy one first, or what I perceive to be the easy one, which is the one about, doing parking by bedrooms, okay, which was one of the suggestions that the consultant made about how to handle it. And again, the whole purpose here, and the reason I'm driving a little bit, is that the current zoning is outdated and cumbersome. It's based upon residential homes where you had to have 2 parking spots for every residence, okay, and that's probably not appropriate in today's environment. Certainly when we're trying to drive things to less automobiles, okay, and smaller buildings. Whether we'll be successful or not, that's not for me to say, okay? So one of the recommendations the consultant made was that we change the zoning based upon bedrooms, okay? I like the simplicity of the,
Elizabeth, could you put that language up?
Yeah.
So, there were, 2 different,
Yeah.
versions provided. The first version that I sent out was, my initial draft based on the board's previous conversation. You had talked about single family and 2-family. So that's how I drafted it. You did not have, an in-depth conversation about multifamily. And so, the first draft separated those out. And then, the second draft that went out would show, this is, if you did choose to also incorporate multifamily in that, then that's how that bylaw amendment would look. So I can bring up,
and I asked Elizabeth to send me the latest 3 zoning approvals that we did on 3 separate parcels, okay, to see if we implemented,
multifamily. Oh, yeah.
if we implemented this, what impact would it have on what decisions we had made previously on this, okay? And the first one obviously is the Noble project, okay? Where there are 201 units, okay, and based upon that, they would have needed 402 parking spaces, okay? Now 25% of that is affordable, so that reduces the number of parks, because you only need it under current zoning, you need 1.5 on affordable versus 2, okay? So that immediately reduces it down by like 25, okay, or something like that, okay? So we granted approval on 284, okay? Under this zoning bylaw, they would have required 222, okay? So there's a difference there, okay? And is that difference gonna come into play? I don't know, okay? I just thought it would be interesting to look to see what the impact would be, okay? So then I looked at 406 Old Marlborough Road, which is the,
PRD, that the Concord
Right.
Housing Development Corporation did,
I call that where they had one house that they're gonna make into a two-family and then they
3 additional
Right.
single-family dwellings.
exactly, okay, so, there's a two-family, one bedroom each, okay, which would have had 1.5 because it's affordable, okay? And then 3 single families with 3 bedroom, which would have required 2 each, okay, which would have required 9 spaces. Okay, under this guidance, it would have required 8 spaces. Okay, so there's not a whole lot of difference in that small unit, okay? So
So,
look,
yeah, I'm perplexed a little bit about if the parking is
too
based
bad.
on the number of bedrooms.
well, that's one of the proposals. we're
That's
saying,
the proposal,
But
yeah.
previously it wasn't.
It
Previously
wasn't.
it was just about residents. What the current zoning says that for every residence requires 2 parking spaces.
Requires 2.
Unless it is affordable, and then it's 1.5. And the problem is we kept having to grant special conditions, particularly for multifamily dwellings, okay? And that's what we're trying to simplify the process, so that when somebody wants to build a project, they have a clearer understanding of what the parking is required, okay? Parking is very expensive, it's, even just the surface parking is $5,000, so they
No,
have to go underground.
I get all that. I guess what I'm confused about is if it's based on bedrooms, if you've got a unit and the current zoning is two spots for each unit, but that unit has 3 bedrooms, is it now required to have 3
No,
spots?
No,
Okay,
so
that's
the
what,
bylaw's up here. It's 1
Okay.
space per dwelling unit with 2 bedrooms or less. 2 spaces per dwelling unit
Oh.
with 3 or more bedrooms.
thank you, thank you.
so then I looked at, 1651 to 57 Main Street
Which
project,
is, the Mill Run,
okay?
Commons. Mill Run.
Yeah. Which has got 14 units in it, 6,
That's the, newest development next to Riverwalk.
Oh, okay,
P.
got it.
There's 6 3-bedrooms, 4 2-bedrooms, and 2 duplexes with 1 bedroom each. I don't know if any of them are affordable, so I didn't factor that into it, okay?
Two.
So, and obviously if it's affordable, it reduces the zoning bylaw to 1.5 as opposed to 2, okay, so. They built 2 carports like.
They're,
the
yes, they
Car
call them
barns is what they
car
call.
barns is what they
Okay.
call them, but
But
they're
they-
large detached
Right.
structures for
Okay.
cars and people have to actually walk to their dwelling unit.
Right, which have 4 each, so that's 8 there, and then they have 16 surface, which is 24, okay? Under this zoning bylaw, they would have required 20 parking spaces, okay?
Okay.
So there is a little bit of a difference, okay, and again, I just thought it would be interesting to look at what decisions we made and what impact it would have had on things. First of all, I don't think it's dramatic, I think Nouveau probably is a little bit more dramatic than the others, okay? But- And the question is, where do we wanna go with this, okay? Is it worth our while to try to amend the parking bylaw for residences right now? Okay? Or do we not do it, okay? There's a lot of concern around town about parking, part of it is nothing to do with us, but parking's a hot button for a lot of people in town, okay? All we can do is address the zoning bylaws. What's everybody's thought on?
So I think the
Yes.
challenge is gonna be on the larger developments, the smaller ones. Just doing some quick math, I mean, 406 was an 11% reduction, 1 spot, right? And then 1651 would have been, about a 16% drop, right?
Right.
1/6, right? But the Nova would have been 22%. So that's something we just have to think about there. So that's a big drop, you
Right.
know? So that's my only concern off the cuff with that.
Well, the other option is we go to play the first option, which is that we say, 2 bedrooms requires 2 parking spots. The studios in 1 bedroom only require 1, and 2 bedrooms require 2. In the terms of Novo, that, there are 99 2 bedrooms.
Mhm.
So that would have added another 99.
Yeah.
Not quite, because some of them were affordable, so you gotta deduct out a little bit of that, okay? But that would have made a significant difference in that,
Mm.
okay?
But I'm not convinced that either bylaw amendment is going to have any measurable
Material
impact.
impact.
Material, I'm gonna,
Yeah.
okay, it can't be measured, but
Yeah.
whether that's a
Yeah.
material
impact, yeah.
impact or not is the other question. And, you know, I know Sue has her hand up, but, you also don't have to decide this
Yeah.
tonight, so,
Right, yeah.
I think it's just have the discussion and then, you know, think about, come up with different, you know, questions or, you know, I can take Mark's figures and, you know, send them out to everybody so you have them and think about it more, but you know, Sue has.
Sue, you have a question? Sue?
Yes, not a question so much as a comment, which is, it's really great to get your numbers, Mark. I think we should see them as an outer bound because, I mean, as we've mentioned before, there's no overnight on-street parking in Concord. I think developers were going to be very careful about to what degree they would take advantage of a reduction in the allowance for parking, because on the one hand, it's much more profitable to build a building with less parking in it. But on the other hand, not if people won't rent the apartments because they can, or buy the houses because they can't park there. So I mean, people are very concerned about the availability of parking in Concord. But here it's going to be a matter of how intelligent the developers will be, whether they want to risk taking a bath on something they can't sell versus whether they think they can actually provide a much more sensible and profitable development for themselves by reducing the parking. So I think it's not as cut and dried a matter of, well, if we pass this, there will be slightly less parking provided. So to me, that makes it less of a risk to go forward with than it would be if it would simply be a matter of, well, there goes a whole pile of parking that we might have needed. No, there are, of course, developers who will make foolish decisions, but you know, in every arena, there are people who will do foolish things, and they're professionals at their job. They want to make money. So I just wanted to comment that I don't think that this is as dangerous as some people might think.
Thanks. You know, the trouble is, nothing is bulletproof. As I told Linda earlier, you know, a developer could come in and say, well, I've got a 2-bedroom and a den, okay? And therefore I only require 1 parking spot, okay?
So I did have a chance to talk with the building commissioner and the 2 local building inspectors specifically about you know, actually all of the warrant articles. But for this one, I raised that as a question. And you know, the building commissioner, as the zoning enforcement officer, really is the, you know, the first authority in interpreting the zoning bylaw. So if somebody were to two things. So if you're talking about, you know, if it's a single family dwelling or a 2-family, currently 2-family is by special permit, so it's gonna be reviewed through the Board of Appeals. But even a single family dwelling, most single family dwellings, even, you know, if somebody were to actually build a 2-bedroom dwelling, which is highly unlikely, there's probably gonna be a 2-car garage anyways, because that's what the market demands. He said some of the 2 families that have been built, there's a 1-car garage, but there is always a parking space in front of the garage because you have to be that far off the street. Somebody can't, you know, have their car parked in front of the garage and sticking out, you know, into the street. So, he didn't see an issue with that. To the question about, well, what about, you know, interpreting bedrooms? And he says, if he looks at a plan and it's den, my office, my spouse's office, rec room, and 2 bedrooms, he would say, no, I've made a determination that this is actually a 5-bedroom house. That person can either change their plan, provide 2 parking spaces, or he makes that determination. It's appealable to the Board of Appeals if somebody wishes to go through that whole process to appeal his decision, but he did not see that
That's interesting.
becoming
I hadn't thought about that because obviously,
becoming too much of an issue for him.
yeah, I mean, they obviously have to go to the Board of Health and get a permit for the number of bedrooms for their septic system too. Okay, so, you know, I mean, that can
Right.
come into play. Okay.
So for Title V, it's, they count up the number of rooms. And when you get to, 8 rooms or more, they divide by half, and that's your
Is that how
bedroom
they do
count.
it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So you have kitchen, family room, living room, dining room, bedroom, office, finished basement, you're at 8, so you have to build a 4-bedroom system regardless of whether you called it office, playroom, bedroom, but you're building a 4-bedroom
Yeah.
system.
Interesting.
One concern that I would have, is that I agree completely with Sue, that's not my concern. In terms of let the market solve this issue, we don't have to in terms of developers. The thing that would concern me is that you could have a developer who then charges for parking. So you've allowed them to skinny down the number of available spaces, charge quite a bit for parking, and then there's some inequities. And that sort of bothers me a little bit, so I want to think about that.
Are you thinking, I don't understand your concern, are you thinking somebody builds a, a multifamily?
Yeah,
unit,
it
it has 6 parking spots, or 4 parking spots, and they're not deeded to the unit, they're sold separately, so this person buys 3 of them, this person buys 1 of them. So they're charging separately for them. Is that your concern?
Yeah.
But they're like not deeded to the unit that they're being, like you do in Boston. You're buying your parking spot and it's an
Or
additional
you're
200
renting it,
grand. Yeah.
whichever, you buy or rent it, and then, especially if you have, affordable housing in with it, then you are, putting the burden of circling the block, looking for parking
Yeah,
to the group that cannot.
because they're not
necessarily
assigned
afford.
to a unit. It's just you have this many bedrooms, you have this many parking spots on property, but they're not.
So it depends on the
The
project.
yeah.
I mean, that's
So
not
for
something we
like
can determine.
But
Nova,
we don't require that.
for the comprehensive permit, each unit has to be provided a parking space.
Got it.
And so that's different. And not to really, throw this, down a rabbit hole or off the
Yeah.
rails. The RHSO director, Liz Russ, does not even agree with, just because it's an affordable unit, it should only have 1.5 spaces.
Yeah.
More than likely, people that are in affordable units, are the ones that probably have to travel by a car to a job.
Mhm.
And probably, more than likely are, sharing the burden of, home ownership or even rental, with somebody else who has a job somewhere else in a different direction even. So just because it's an affordable unit doesn't mean they only have 1 car. So
Was it designed just to incentivize the construction of affordable units
yeah.
because it was fewer parking, less cost?
probably.
Yeah, the intent was to incentivize the construction, not actually based in observation of parking use and patterns,
Correct.
and, yeah.
Right.
So, you know, to your point, I mean, this, I'd have to have a conversation with, Liz, you know, to see her thoughts, but, you know, if it was really a structured, one space per studio and one bedroom, and, you know, and then, you know, two spaces for two bedrooms or more, but then, you know, thought more about multifamily. Because currently, you know, we met with the developers for 275 Forest Ridge Road, the comprehensive permit today. And, you know, they've developed similar projects like that, you know, and have rental projects, you know, all over. And their consistent model is for that size of project in that type of building is 1.6 spaces per unit. They have 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And how they design their parking, they have, you know, a few more spaces around the building that has the amenities in it. And, you know, fewer spaces around, you know, the other building, but, so based on building, the amenity building is about at 1.9, and the other building is, you know, at about 1.4. And, you know, averages out to 1.6 for the whole site, so, you know, it's a complicated, real world process that, you know, they go through, but, you know, that's currently a project that's 237 units.
And how many of those are gonna be affordable? 25%?
Yeah.
So they're gonna have a problem with parking. Getting parking past zoning. If they base it upon 1.6, that's not gonna be enough parking.
They are requesting a waiver from parking. It's not 2
Right.
spaces per,
Right.
you know, per unit. It's,
Right.
you know, it's like 1.6.
Right.
I'm trying to put this in a bigger context for myself because I'm new here. I hope I can say this for a really long time.
2 years.
So tell me about this warrant article. Where did it come from? How did it get on into the warrant? Who proposed it? Is this,
It's not in
It's not
the
in there
warrant.
yet.
it's not in the warrant?
The warrant closes February 19th.
Okay,
So last year, the planning board had a consultant and, you know, I thought I provided you all the, but I can provide you so much material for you
Right.
to read. It'll make your head explode. But the board had a traffic, engineering consultant review the parking section in the
and this was
bylaw.
one of the suggestions. that's in
Was
that.
to look at reducing the residential parking requirements.
Okay,
But, you know, as you'll hear me say often, when you read his technical memo, you know, it's technically, you know, on average, this is, you know, this is what, you know, is the, I'm gonna say some of the standards or industry standards, the institution, of transportation engineers, you know, does parking calculations for different uses all over the United States. You have his recommendation based on that data.
Mhm.
But once you start trying to insert it into, you know, a zoning bylaw that was adopted since 1928, it becomes, this is where, you know, it becomes challenging when you start talking about, okay, well, you know, this is that unintended consequence, Mark's calculations. You know, it's 22% for this size project, but it's only 10% for this project.
So we decided a couple of years ago that parking needed to be addressed, okay? And so we took on that challenge. We couldn't do anything with it in last year's town meeting because we had a whole bunch of other things going on. Okay, so we sort of shelved it to this year, okay? And, you know, we've been fiddling with it, I guess, for the better part of 2 years, trying to figure out the best way to go, whether it's worth going forward with it or not, okay? And if we did, how to go about it, okay? I said, and tried to drive it from the get-go with two things that I thought we could do. I thought one was the resident parking. I thought that the zoning bylaw was based upon 30 years ago, where you had residences that had their two parking spots. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Okay. And then the other part of it is the one that we're gonna talk about next, which is the shared zoning. I think there's opportunities to relieve parking by being more aggressive about the way we allow people to share parking. Okay.
So the goal of this is to reduce the demand, the requirement for parking spaces. The consultant made the recommendation based on data of how
Industry
the latest industry standards. So would we be looking at this from that data point of view, as well as does this accomplish the goal of reducing the requirements for parking?
We're looking at it based upon industry standards that he's presented to us within other communities and with overall standards. Okay, so that's what we asked, that's what we paid him to do. That's his profession. Okay, and then we're trying to find ways to alleviate some of the special conditions that we've had to go by. Because that's what happens now. We do a special condition.
Yeah.
And we've done in all of these cases, okay, with the apartments over in West Concord, whatever it is.
Brookside Square.
Brookside Square, we had to, a special condition.
When we see consistently that we're having to offer special conditions, it makes us look and say, okay, if we're, it's a little bit with like, for example, with the subdivisions with sidewalks. It's like, if we're constantly saying, no, we'll grant a special condition for that, then it makes us take a second look and say, does this need to be updated?
Okay,
If we're always
Mhm.
offering an exception, maybe we need to change the rule
okay,
rather than continue to just always offer exceptions.
okay.
So that's why it's taking a look at it. Now, whether we move forward with it, it's a different question, but it's like they've been on the books long enough and we're making special conditions often enough that it's worth taking a look at. Do we actually need to adjust this, or does our current regime of this is the way it is and we'll do it by case basis, does that make sense?
We're also being, excuse me, let me just finish one thing. We're also being driven by what other communities are doing, okay?
Right.
A number of communities, particularly in more metropolitan areas, whether it be Austin, Texas, or Somerville, Massachusetts, has completely done away with parking requirements, okay? We can't do that, all right? We're still an auto-centric community, and we still need to make sure that we're taking care of that, okay? I'm sorry, Sue, go ahead.
I'd like to say also, just to add into what everyone else has said, that the goal isn't to reduce parking requirements. The goal is to right size them, and part of that is considering that there are many very serious detriments to parking. Not only that it costs a lot of money to build, but it also takes away land that could be used for something else. If you're looking at a commercial downtown, if you spend all of your time walking past these giant parking lots, you can only go to half as many stores. If there was less parking, you could have a much more pleasant pedestrian experience going to store without all that parking in the way, and also eating up land that could provide town revenue. And parking obviously is necessary. So we're seeing here, as everyone else has said, that there must be a problem or we wouldn't be getting all these special conditions in terms of right sizing our parking. But it's not simply just to get rid of it.
So the one other observation, as you're talking about, when there's requests for waivers over and over and over again, and they keep continually being granted, there aren't requests for waivers for single family dwellings, 2-family dwellings, even for 406 Old Bedford, that was just five units. It really has been, when you're looking at larger developments where I think Mill Run was how many? 7, 6. I think
6
12.
3 bedrooms, 4, and then 2 duplexes, so 12. 14, 2 duplexes.
Yeah, so that was 14 units. It's when you're getting into, I don't know exactly, 12, 14 units and more. where it's that cost and eating up, you know, available land and resources starts to make that shift. I don't know exactly what that tipping point is. So it may be looking more at the, you know, that metric to, you know, reduce reduce parking, that, you know, that's another metric to look at. I don't know if that's in your consultant's technical memo.
Yeah,
I
we
can,
take a look at
we
that.
can look and
I hadn't thought about
and
that.
he can, and, you know, we can ask him to, you know,
Right.
to look into that further. You know, that's just a different metric to look at.
Yeah, because if this isn't something that's problematic in single family and two family,
It is,
and then
it is
it's,
not.
then it's,
Right.
are we? Yes, it's helpful to make kind of broad changes, but should we be tailoring this specifically to developments of X number of units and more? And phase it so that it's units of, you know, developments of units from 10 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to, you know. If we see shifts in, if we're worried about the 22% reduction at a certain size, but we're less worried about it at, you know. That would be my question, is that does. What we're trying to accomplish, does it change as the size of the development grows? And so that the type of relief that we'd be offering through
I can,
a zoning bylaw amendment, should that change with the size of the development as well?
But
In
then
that-
the larger the development, the more the economy of scale, in the sense that somebody's on vacation, somebody's car is in the shop. And so you need fewer and fewer spaces per unit by a small proportion, the larger the
Right.
project.
Sorry, what I was gonna say, so the other thing is, we gotta look at it also, you know, or think about it, is that. These developers, larger ones, are not gonna be put like away from town center and not have these parking spaces, right?
Mhm.
Like, to everyone's point, if those places are a mile and a half from town center. And they have a spot or whatever, less than that per unit, no one's gonna wanna rent them. You know, versus the, like Novo's right adjacent to the train, you know, it's gonna be a walk to the train station, so I mean, I don't know if we wanna go, you know, dive too deep into it, but. You know,
We thought about that, using the MBTA parameter of, you know, within a mile and a half a mile of the train station, it has a reduction in the parking requirement, okay? Correct? Okay, and I thought about implementing that as part of this, but I was trying to keep it simple.
Yeah.
it's, you know. Like, you know, we've talked about it before, like you think we're gonna solve a problem and potentially open up,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah,
That's,
In terms of keeping it simple, that seems like a really good reason to leave single families and two families in it. I agree with Elizabeth. I think it's very unlikely they're going to come with only one parking space, but if it's just the same across the board, then they'll get their two parking spaces regardless, and no harm in it.
okay, so, I will ask the consultant, to look into, data and parking requirements. Actually based on the, you know, the size of the development. So whether, you know, that's, you know, 1 to 10, you know, 10, you know,
Yeah.
have him look at, and if there's, examples out there. Where it shows, you know, a reduction in the required amount of parking for larger developments. But based on, you know, Novo, which I do agree, that proximity to, you know, walkable proximity to the train station. But then, you know, what we have the perfect example, 275 Forest Ridge Road, where they will not reduce their parking below 1.6 per unit, because that is, you know, what they know from actual experience of managing, you know, very similar projects in similar locations that, you know, aren't on a, you know, public bus line or walkable to, you know, a train station or a bus, you know, public transit. So, I'll ask him to, pull some of that information, as well as whether there is information that supports that reduction in parking based on, let's say, a 5 or 10 minute walk to public transit. Which limits, somebody within a 5-10 minute walk to either commuter rail station. Maybe one day we'll have a public shuttle.
Do we know, what you were saying about, getting lots of requests for the relief from parking? Is it less likely that we get requests for relief from parking from those developments that are farther away from town than those developments that are closer to town? Is that sort of how it plays out?
Again, we're only talking about residential, and I don't see this change, this type of amendment having a huge impact or a material impact to parking. I think some of the other the joint parking amendment for commercial will have, a much larger impact. I also think, the current zoning bylaw, how it deals with schools and the, public and private schools has never been, analyzed. Again, there's a difference in what Concord Academy requires compared to what Middlesex School requires. And that's, proximity and walkability.
Okay.
And it's just, it's a lot, it's just more challenging for some other uses. But I think to the previous, project and the conversation, what I was writing down, is look at parking requirements based on the square footage of the space occupied for, those types of commercial and industrial spaces and, professional office spaces. Smaller occupied spaces may require a higher parking requirement than, larger spaces. Or maybe with larger spaces, it's not gross square footage, which is outside wall to outside wall. It's excluding common areas, hallways.
Or leasable space, I mean, cause when you rent an office,
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
define where people are
It all
gonna.
depends on how they fit it out. I mean,
Yeah.
Right,
it's gonna be that another.
Yeah.
Hate to say it,
Yeah.
but rabbit hole.
Yeah.
right, yeah, I mean, there's ways around it, yeah.
But, I have to imagine, there's examples out there of on, that isn't just a flat square footage. And that flat square footage, and, I can ask the consultant, cause, he did make recommendations to lower some of the parking requirements, the square footage requirements. And that data point may be in the ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, takes that, this type of space that's more than 10,000 square feet, they factor in, it's like, okay, well, it's gonna have to have, this amount of hallways and common space, and so,
Right.
it's not one space per 1,000 square feet, it's one space per, 1,200, square feet. And that may be how they get to that ratio, so but that is a question that I would send to the consultant and have him ask, so that was my other part I was gonna ask him about, but outside of this conversation, so. All right, so I'll follow up with him on those, 2 items and report back to the board at the next meeting.
And we'll see where it goes, I mean, I think it's worth us having a discussion about, okay?
Absolutely.
So, We'll see what goes, okay? And then the other one
Did
is,
you want to see if there's public comment on this one?
oh, yeah, is there any public comments on the potential zoning bylaw that we just discussed?
Carol.
Hello, Carol.
Hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. I had a public comment in regards to this particular discussion. I'm just thinking what Concord has on the docket right now, Novo, that's a really big development. And yeah, you can walk to the train, and it's also, there's a lot of like empty parking lots on commercial buildings right around Novo, and I think whoever was talking about that Novo development and calculated the spots, he had a deal with Marriott or something, the Marriott parking lot. So, there were other places people could park if they didn't have a parking spot, so I think there's decent coverage there. But when I think about MCI or Forest Ridge Road, I'm a member of the Thoreau Club, and that's going in right next door. I don't want those people, parking all over Thoreau Club and not being able to get a parking spot when I go to the gym. And I think a lot of the development around there's nowhere really to park on Forest Ridge Road other than, what they're building. So you may want to look at how many parking spots they actually, need, and make sure that they have enough there. And if you look at MCI, where are they going to park if you don't have, 2 spots for a 2-bedroom unit? Are they going to park on Route 2 or Com Ave? Or there's nowhere for them to park there, right? And yeah, they can walk to the train, but it's kind of a long walk to the train. So I think, there might be some unintended consequences of these changes. So I think you might want to, consider that most of the things that are coming in the pipeline right now are really big developments, right? And 229 Main Street or something, that's going to, who knows what that's going to be. But these are, these aren't small little, duplexes. These are, 200 plus units. And MCI, I don't know how many units are going to go there, but, the governor and everybody wants a lot of housing there. So I think you really got to make sure that there's adequate parking for these folks, because otherwise it's just going to spill over into the neighborhoods or their, surrounding streets. And we saw that, with Concord Academy. They were off for the past 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and it was like a ghost town on Main Street and in our neighborhoods on, Academy and Middle and Belknap. They came back today, and, it's full on Academy, it's full on Middle, it's full all the way down Main Street. So, if they don't provide parking, it spills over to the neighborhood, and that's another unintended consequence. And, maybe if you don't live in the neighborhood, you don't care, but the people that do live in these downtown neighborhoods do care.
Thank you, Carol. Any other public comments?
Susan.
Susan.
Hello, how are you? Susan Melodizenik, 392 Border Road. I'm the chair of WCAC, but I'm speaking for myself and making my comment. I'm also a member of the Thoreau Club, and I was fascinated to hear about the plans for seemingly less parking over at the residences by Thoreau. But when I do think about it, I go to the gym in the evening, and I can't say anytime I've ever seen the parking lot that is serving the gym more than, say, 40% full. And that's when you have the swim team practicing, you have tennis people coming to use the indoor courts, you have people like me going to workout classes. So I honestly don't know the way the parking lot is at other times of day, but it could make sense to do a little bit of a time study over there. I do think if there's not enough parking at the new residences by Thoreau that are built there, people will spill over into the Thoreau lot, the Thoreau Club lot. But right now, I don't see that actually being a big problem. I actually see that as thank God some of that space is being used because there's an enormous lot adjacent to what used to be the Concord Muse that never has any cars in it that the Thoreau Club seems to own. So I guess I just wanted to provide my perspective from what I see when I'm over there. I'm not as concerned, I guess, as Carol, but I do think it bears looking at in terms of the timing when people would need to park over there. And
Thank you,
thanks for looking at the parking issue. I'm so excited that you're doing this.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, okay, no further comments, and let's attack the second parking situation that you got a notice on, and that's about joint or shared parking. Again, I think that's an opportunity for us. And basically what I was looking to do is fairly limited now in terms of what industries can be allowed to share parking. And I think we should open that up to just about anybody that does a study and is within 400 feet and has excess parking. We should find a way to utilize that. Again, the whole concept here is to making sure we're utilizing the parking spaces that are available to the best of our advantage, so we don't have a lot of vacant lots and, you know, the resultant impervious surfaces, okay?
So I can go through, so as I, there you go. As I said earlier, I did, speak with the, the building commissioner. And my first question, a written joint parking agreement approved as to form would be by the planning board. What would be reflected, and this is what you saw in the 310 Baker Ave recommendation, is there's a corresponding condition that they need to actually provide that executed joint parking agreement before occupancy is granted. So that's where the building commissioner would be involved in that instance for a project that gets approved to utilize joint parking.
And does that is an agreement between
All
the
tenants.
correct? Okay.
It's all
Change of
parties involved.
tenant would require
So that's,
an
I'm gonna,
execution,
I'm
okay.
gonna get to that one.
Okay.
Um,
And that's to allow to provide occupancy.
correct.
So if someone doesn't have a fully signed agreement, they could go all the way through, build the building, and not get an occupancy permit, but they could go all the way through and build a building that just sits there.
So let's take Cross Point. That's a 4-tenant building.
Mhm.
They will not be having occupancy for each one of those tenants all at once. There'll be individual occupancy permits. So more than likely, there's going to be your first joint parking agreement, which is going to be between the, first tenant needs to sign with Cross Point. And the bank goes in. And finally, Salia Pizza gets fitted out. Then they will have to submit a amended joint parking agreement that is between the bank, Salia Pizza, and Cross Point. And so for each occupancy permit, that tenant will need to agree to the joint parking agreement.
I guess I was thinking more of the Common Ave project that couldn't find enough parking and couldn't negotiate parking with the nearby establishments. And the concern would be that they would go ahead and build out the building and
Well, they do that with their own risk
Yes,
without a
yeah.
At
negotiated
their own
agreement
risk.
at outset.
Okay.
So we wouldn't give them approval on the building.
But part of their, part of
Because
their
parking-
application, their
Right.
site plan application would have to include the joint parking agreement.
Right.
So that's joint parking, that's not off-site parking. So that's different,
okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
okay, fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so off-site
Yeah,
parking is something
That's
different.
something
Yeah.
different.
Um.
Got
And So this second sentence was one that the consultant had, your transportation consultant had inserted. This is in addition to any other such filing of agreements with. I'm not sure that needs to be in there from a zoning perspective, so that's just a question I would raise to town council. And sorry. And to your point, when I spoke with the building commissioner under this BI, the common parking area must be within 400 feet of the subject building and or uses they serve. So his comments, well, as measured from what or where or, so that's something that,
We need
yeah.
defining.
Yeah, so I will ask your consultant, but for everybody to kind of think about that, it is that 400 feet from
From the point of public access to the building, I would assume.
We could
Right,
property
right.
That's an
line,
assumption. You could say it's 400 feet from the end of their lot or
But if
something.
the idea is like, we can use that space because
Right.
the person coming to our business is going to walk to our business,
Yeah.
I would say the point of public access.
I mean, but how many feet are we talking if we're going there and we're adding maybe if we say.
So we should define it. I mean,
Yeah,
We should, I don't,
Yeah.
I'm
Building
saying,
commissioner needs
yeah,
clarification.
but 400 feet, I mean, most of the entrances is probably gonna have, it'd be 450 feet maybe,
Yeah.
if you're going for the property line versus the public entrance, I mean.
So I will ask him to provide a little bit more information and clarification and, on that one. Sue provided her comments on clarification and wording, which I agree with, and I believe I sent to the board as well. Again, a question for town council, but I'm fairly certain you would not put examples in the zoning. But as Sue commented later, that would be great to put in the presentation or even below in the explanation.
Do we think it has merit?
This is a general concept? Sure,
We already have one in there. we're gonna broaden the scope of it.
yeah.
Okay, right now it's limited to like banks and I'd have to look it up
Oh,
to
yeah.
see exactly, but it's defined by industries and I'm not so sure that needs to be the case.
Yeah. So
Yeah, the current bylaw allows a decrease in the minimum parking requirement. Again, up to 50%, so there's no metric behind that, it's just 50%. But only for educational, religious, lodge and club, indoor amusement and restaurant uses that are jointly used by a bank, office, retail store, repair shop, service establishment, and other uses not normally open, used or operated during similar hours. So I think what the board learned with the Crosspoint project, when you looked at the hour by hour, and again, they could have reduced the amount of parking. And they chose not to, because the zoning bylaw currently said, you need 250 spaces, and the board pushed back to, reduce the number of spaces. They reduced a few of them, but if you looked at that use, a use table, hour by hour use table, they're never gonna use, the amount of parking, that is being built on that site. I think the difference with this joint parking requirement is, again, the conversation we had is that, shared or joint use of off-street parking is strongly encouraged. I don't think the board can go so far as to require joint parking. It is still, property owner's right to provide how much parking they feel they need, but I think this strikes a good balance. Into what information you would require for somebody to move forward with this. And then, under this item D, it just adding. This is to your point, when there's a change of use, that they need to, provide basically the same information they provided during their initial permitting. They would provide that to the building commissioner. He would make a determination, and then, if he agrees that, you know, that change of use in the joint parking analysis still stands, then they would have to provide a revised, you know, a re-executed joint parking agreement with the new tenant. If he determines that the documentation is not satisfactory or that additional spaces are required, then they shall be provided prior to the change of use. And what that would do is it would probably trigger a requirement to amend the existing site plan to make that happen in some fashion.
I have a question. You were saying off-street parking facilities for 2 or more buildings or uses may be provided and used collectively or jointly. Would that permit Spot Hero? As a joint use?
Well, they'd have to have an agreement in writing. And it would have to be approved by the building commission, right?
Well, initially it would have to be approved by the planning board.
Right. It's a good question because there is opportunities for
But
that.
then that would say that there's a process by which, I mean, I don't have anything against Spot Hero.
Right,
In fact, I
but that's not our
love it.
intention. That's not our intention, is,
Well, but
right,
my guess is unintended consequences. Would this be an unintended consequence that Spot Hero could come and?
Well,
I don't know.
so currently they would have to go through site plan review to allow that to happen.
Okay.
What is Hero?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's an app where you can reserve a parking space. And it's often used in Boston and
Okay.
Cambridge, so
New York
that
City, I use it all
if
over the
you're going
country.
into like a restaurant at night and someone,
Are there spaces in Concord?
No, I looked before, cause
Okay.
I was looking during
Who
the,
owns those
for the
spaces?
parade last year.
people. So
So that,
Oh, okay, so you could,
So-
you
Like
could
I have a
say,
friend who lives in the
outside your-
south end and she
Yeah.
has her own parking spot. And on Friday, Saturday, she moves her car to the street and she rents it out. So for people who are coming in for dinner and things like that.
Wait, I thought Elizabeth said that people can't operate a parking garage on their property, in essence. Would have to get permitted for that. But if you're a place of business, you already have the right for people to come onto your property. But still, would that be a change of use or an accessory use that you're selling your own parking?
okay, that was a multi-part.
Well, let me rephrase that, Elizabeth, too. I'm not sure that's relevant to this discussion. I think it's too deep into the weeds and either it works or it doesn't work.
Let's say a single family dwelling has, you know. I do not know when it comes to a single family dwelling, if somebody decided they wanted to rent an extra space in their garage. You know,
But it would be like the optician could, if they have space by the train station, the optician could rent it out to people who are using 80 Thoreau for dinner. Or
possibly, yes. I mean, and that is probably something that happens, you know, now. But informally, not something that, you know, the building commissioner is going around asking every business, or, you know, when you're closed, are you, you know, you renting your spaces to the restaurant next door. If it's their business, if they're closed and they want to allow somebody, I mean, they, you know, I'm sure that happens.
And if they're not using it for relief from parking, there's kind of no problem with that, right?
We're talking about zoning relief from parking through joints, okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
so that is just, you know, they
That's different.
each have their own, you know.
Everybody's got enough parking spots under the zoning, but the restaurant says it's actually really helpful for our 10 wait staff to park somewhere. And they say, you know, use ours. I mean, if they're not asking for
That's true.
relief, that's outside of
That's-
our,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
That's
That's
different
fine.
than,
That's
you know,
different.
joint parking, which allows for a reduction in the amount of parking.
So what are we doing with this? Thinking about it?
So I will get clarification on, from town council on, you know, at least that, the one question. I will get more information from your consultant on the distance
Right,
question.
refine that so that
Yeah.
it's something that's important.
it seems like the fundamental change is that we've gone from these restricted uses that allow this to opening it up to any use.
That's correct.
Which, in my mind, as long as they can provide the documentation that proves.
Yep.
That I don't see why we wouldn't make that shift.
Right.
You know, as long as you can show that this actually does work. And that your hours are differentiated enough and it provides the right amount of parking and all the rest of it, if all of those are met. I don't really care what the two businesses are doing, as long as those minimum standards are
I
met.
mean, with the intent here to reduce parking
Which
spaces,
is-
okay, I
yeah.
mean, you know, and to make it easier for people to afford to do things and not have parking get in their way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And not have parking sit empty
Right,
for
Yeah,
one
I mean,
use.
look at
And
the Jim built the parking deck that he put on over there,
Mhm.
there's never anything in there,
No.
okay?
No.
You know
well,
what I'm saying?
it,
Go ahead, Sue, sorry.
I see more reasons to expand joint parking, which I thought has been a great idea and we've wanted to be seeing more of for many years, which is it's also a safety measure. Take a look at Deborah's and the surrounding businesses where there's a joint parking agreement. You park at one, you do your shopping, you walk to the next store. You don't have to walk back to your store through a parking lot where you could get hit by a car, get in your car, drive in it where you could hit a pedestrian, to the next business over and repark your car, kicking out exhaust, which is the worst in the first minute of starting your car, just to shop at the next business over, and wasting your time while you're doing all those things, because that takes a lot longer than just walking next door. It's a great idea, you know, provided that there is a documentation in the individual case to support it.
Thank you.
I got one, where did the 400 feet come from? Was that just arbitrary or
That's current zoning.
turns out, okay, sorry, just want to make sure.
No.
No, did you make that up?
Someone pulled it out of the hat.
Sounds good.
No, that was in
That was-
your
yeah,
consultant's technical memo, so I will ask him for, you know, that'll be part of that clarification.
I'm just saying, we should look at it and, I mean, 400 feet's not a lot.
Yeah, it may need to be,
I mean, I'm almost willing to, I mean,
Longer.
I would go to 800 feet. I mean, you know, just think about West Village Tavern, right? Perfect example, right? They're using all the street park, they have to use street parking. Wagon Wash is maybe 400 feet away. It's empty at night, you know, just
So
an example.
that's, so again, that's different.
Yeah.
That's
I know,
off-site parking,
True.
which that's a separate
there
section,
you go.
which I think that's probably also something that needs to be looked at. You know, maybe not necessarily right now and trying to draft something in a month, but that is also something where it should be made easier, because right now it's a special permit.
Mhm.
And you know, so there has to be easier ways to allow joint parking and
400
you know,
feet's gonna be
so-
on the same property, so it's not gonna be far then. I mean,
which, and I'll go back and look, I think the consultant's first memo did take joint parking and included on-site and off-site in their technical memo. I'll look at that a little bit more as it relates to the current offsite parking section, because. You know, maybe. Maybe again, so maybe it's not just special permit, but when you do your site plan review. You know, part of your site plan review, whether you have joint parking on site or joint parking with another use within. I think it's currently the off-site parking is with 600 feet. And that's been in there since, I don't know where 600 feet came from, but. Maybe it's, I can ask the consultant, what's a 5-minute walk? Is that,
That's not 400 feet. That's a lot longer than that.
yeah, it's a lot.
And if you think about just the current
Yeah.
use of parking, like if we just think about downtown.
Mhm.
And these are obviously off-site,
Oh,
but if you're
yeah.
parking in the lot behind. Fritz and Gigi, you're probably 400 feet to the bank, but you're also gonna walk over to the G shop, or you're gonna walk, there's
Mhm.
the amount of distance that people are willing to walk. I think is, given the current parking configuration of our kind of respective town centers, is probably farther than that, and they can still consider it to be. A close and accessible walk for a
It all
business.
But it all depends on who it is. Some people, 200 feet's an inconvenience.
Absolutely. They wanna go to Vanderhook, they wanna park right in front of Scott's place.
I was in the drive-through ATM and someone parked at the exit out.
Yeah,
And they were trying to move their car back and forth so I could try to get out. I'm like, no, there's no space there. It's not a parking spot. So, I mean, that's what you're gonna run into as well.
So I can take, I can take a look and, because part of, also part of looking at, the parking requirements dealt with, and I don't wanna say making it easier, but, if somebody, is part of their site plan approval, and as part of site plan, look at off-site parking agreement with like West Village Tavern and Wash and Wag. Why not just have that be part of the site plan approval? And why does it necessarily have to be a special permit?
yeah, I mean, if our goal is to kind of like increase efficiency of use of existing parking, reduce, the kind of hurdle of excessive parking carts, all of that. I think. That should be on the table, but I think the general consensus seems to be that the joint parking. Makes sense, we just have to fine tune.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so I'll look into that.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, the designation of all the different kinds of businesses that was made like, what, 25, 30 years ago?
Who knows, probably.
Well.
No, longer than that.
Longer than
back,
that.
we can look in the very
So
back.
it really doesn't matter that maybe there was a reason for that,
But, we've looked at a lot of different parking situations. The consultant did a really good study on all of these businesses. And one of the things that we get a lot of pressure on is restaurants. We looked at that and we actually don't require enough parking based upon industry standards. Okay, so we decided not to attack that one. Okay.
yeah, I was
so-
just curious.
Yeah,
about
no, it's fine. I was just, we've done a fair amount of work on the whole parking situation and tried to pick up what we consider to be the low hanging fruit. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I will move forward. So you have,
So Mimi and Mike have been watching this.
Yep.
Okay, did you want to say something?
Your discussions about parking to kind of.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. Okay, well, you heard some discussions about parking, so.
Like,
Okay,
can I ask a
All
question
right.
if we're talking about just general questions about parking? So I'm beginning to understand the zoning aspects of parking and how that impacts on parking. But I keep hearing there's no overnight parking in Concord, so that's a policy that the town has made.
So there's two types of parking. There's private private parking on individual lots where the requirement for the amount is governed by the zoning bylaw. And that's what, you know, the planning board is looking at through amendments. And there's public parking, which is governed by the select board and the policies that the select board implements through conversations with, the Public Works Commission, town departments, other boards and committees. So when you talk about on-street public parking, parking in the Walden lot or Kai's Road or Stowe Street by the library, all of those, what happens in the zoning bylaw does not have any impact or bearing on.
Okay, so
those
that's
are-
not our bailiwick.
That's not our-
Yeah, I
But,
get.
you know,
But they play together a little bit.
Well, that's what
Yeah,
I'm wondering when Mike and when Mimi came and talked to us and there was discussion about, if there's some, if you now have residential above a shop but there's not enough parking, how all of that works. It's,
So that would, yeah, so that's where you get into that, what'd you say, they played together.
yeah.
Where you get into, that parallel track conversation where, okay, the planning board, is looking at, no parking requirement for, second floor residential within the downtown, Concord Center Business District or West Concord Business District. That type of amendment, that conversation is also happening with the select board saying, okay, we realize that there still needs to be accommodations. So I think it's, in Boston, they allow overnight parking during the winter. On even days, you're on the right side of the road, so Public Works can plow. The opposite day, you're on the other side, so they can plow. So it comes into, it's not just as simple as saying, we're not gonna require it. It's that dual conversation, and the select board from a policy standpoint would then also have to talk to Public Works and the Public Works director and, what is the ramification of, currently there's no overnight parking. And, during the winter, so Public Works can, plow and clear the streets, so in the morning, all the spaces are available and the roads are clear. So, there's a balance. If you allow, overnight parking on one side during the winter, that side of the road is not gonna get plowed. Everybody has to dig out, their cars. All that snow goes somewhere, then Public Works has to come back. Plow that snow, again. A lot of the times the snow goes onto the sidewalk, and so then it's either the store owners, shoveling out their sidewalk, or Public Works has to send the sidewalk plow down, that side of the road again. So it's, those conversations can happen, at the same time, so that when one happens, these policy requirements, but, the same thing with, the meters didn't work. Nobody was feeding the meters, and, there wasn't parking enforcement. There, currently, it's 3-hour parking. Are tickets being issued? So that's a policy,
Right, right, and that's not our job,
That's
and
not our
it shouldn't even be
Yeah.
taking up the time of this
Okay.
committee to ask about
no,
that.
but it's,
But
You have to
I
think
was
about it
curious.
globally, yeah, because it
Yeah.
can,
so again, for the planning board to move forward and do a bylaw amendment that says you don't need any parking for a residential unit on the second floor in Concord Center. But those people may have one car. Where are they gonna park? Well, they
Mhm.
can't park in Kai's Road lot and they can't park on the street in the winter. So why move forward with that bylaw? When, again, there's gonna be no material change in what's happening.
Okay,
Carol has a comment.
public comment? I can't see.
Carol.
Oh, Carol.
Hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. So I guess when I'm looking at this joint parking, it's, is it covering residential or combined business? So if one of the buildings, because it just talks about a building, it doesn't talk about what's in it, and under 7.7.4.2 or whatever, the table that you reference, it has all sorts of uses in there, and one of the uses is residential. So would one of the unintended consequences be, or is this what you're trying to do, make it that if somebody decides to turn their building into residential on the second floor, then they can do joint parking with somebody and get reduced parking spots?
I don't know the answer to that, Carol. I think we need to study that more. I think oftentimes there are unintended consequences for things that we're trying to accomplish. You know, I think our intent here is good. We need to make sure that we haven't built something that people can skirt the issue and not meet our intention. Our intention is to make it easier for people to find ways to utilize the parking that's available in town, but not to destroy the zoning bylaws either. So I don't think we have the answer. I think your point's well taken.
Well,
So
it's an interesting,
well, let me add to that, to the question about combined business residence. So that would require site plan review to do that type of project. So if somebody did want to utilize joint parking, they would have to go through and provide the documentation that, those uses, because they would have to go through and clearly demonstrate that the need for parking occurs at different times. So, depending on the use, especially weekends, when you're talking about mixed use with residential, that's gonna be hard to document. But that one example, combined business residence, does require site plan review. So, and then if it's just a residential building, no, because they're not different uses and there's no way you could document. They're all residential, so they're not different uses that
With
would be
different operating hours.
with
and
different operating
yeah.
hours. So,
Right.
it would not be for just plain residential projects.
Right, I guess I'm confused, because if I look at table 5, it has all these different uses, and the existing bylaw, which you're trying to change, is a subset of those uses, like retail, bank, or whatever. But then you have residential in there. So I guess my concern is that you guys say, let's give joint parking, and then you get all these residential people that have nowhere to park, right? And we know what happens with that. So we're trying to avoid the
Well, we're
residential
talking
or the
about business.
combined business parking all over the neighborhoods, right?
So, again, you're talking about a project that has available parking on the site for joint uses. So we're not talking about, buildings in Concord Center turning a second floor into residential for a property that has no parking on the site whatsoever. That's different. You're talking about something that's either off-site parking somewhere, or a policy conversation with the select board regarding, overnight parking, in public parking spaces. So that would not, pertain to a joint parking agreement. That's for on-site parking uses.
Right. Well, let's take like Crosby's, for example. There's a big parking lot there that all those businesses use. And if one of the businesses, they all have parking, I'm guessing some subset of that Crosby lot, and they decide we want to put residential on top of our buildings here, and we could do joint parking. Would that be able to happen under this bylaw?
Only if they can document, and I'll.
And it will also require site plan review, which we'd have an opportunity to look at it, Karen.
Only if they can clearly demonstrate that the need for parking occurs at different times. The applicant may propose a reduction in off-street parking based on an analysis hour by hour or a credible combination of hours of parking demand for non-competing uses. So they would have to go through and do an hour by hour analysis for those uses and base their parking on that hour by hour analysis and the combination of hours based on the uses. So it's not just that it's a residential and a business. So I think if you, read through the requirements, that clearly shows that just because somebody is proposing, a combined business residence doesn't mean that, joint parking is going to work. It's going to depend. It's going to depend on how many residents, what type of uses, how many spaces. And somebody would have to do that detailed analysis, and they would have to go through site plan review.
Right, but everybody does that, and people game numbers, right? And I'm sorry, I'm just pointing to Concord Academy every time, but that's the most recent one, and
So Concord Academy has an over 35 space parking lot that's not open yet. So, I'd wait until the construction's done and, they have to provide an analysis. I think
Yeah,
it's
I mean, I
6
think
months
that-
afterwards. So
yeah, I
I'm
mean-
done talking about Concord
Yeah, I mean, I
Academy.
think the residential piece of it makes the hour by hour analysis very difficult to come into compliance. So I think the best example would be if you had, I'm gonna pick two businesses and say they had available parking. If you have Hope, which is open from 7 or 8 until 2 or 3, and then you had, Woods Hill Table that's open from 5 until 10. Those are businesses that you could look at their operating hours and say, there's very little overlap. You may have some staff that overlaps for an hour or two, but you have fundamentally different operating hours where your patrons are gonna be coming to the business. The residential piece of it would complicate matters because I think you would have a difficult argument to make that there's not going to be residential overlap with almost any operating hours for a business. You're gonna have some overlap at least. So I think I understand your concern because it's possible. I just don't think it's probable under the zoning bylaw, given the requirements of what they would need to demonstrate. I also don't think it's necessarily that advantageous where the relief would be that substantial. I think this is something that businesses would take advantage of. And I think it's also limited given the amount of private parking. I don't think this is, kind of widespread in the most congested business districts, given that it's specific to private parking. So I think it's an interesting opportunity. I think we have to explore it more. But that's not a primary concern for me. I understand it. We'll take it under advisement, but it wouldn't be a driver for me in saying no to this type of change.
well, I'm just kind of looking at your explanation on this, and it says, MAPC said this allows them to build existing joint. This allows developers to build less on site if they can demonstrate how parking demands varies over the course of the day, which is what they want to do, right? And that's the concern that the neighborhoods have, is that they'll build less parking and then they'll build some building and then, oh, by the way, you know, it spills all over in the street, and then they say, oh, well, now they have to do something about it, but they've already built the big building. Well, what are they gonna do now? We can't take the building down, right? Concord Academy can't take their building down, they just built it, right? So,
That's why there's a process in place
but they're
for
not
review
finished.
prior to occupancy.
But, you know, Carol, we understand your concerns, and this is a discussion about parking that we're trying to figure out. So we appreciate your input, and we'll take it under advisement. Okay?
yep,
Thank you.
okay. I'd also just like to comment on Thoreau, the Forest Ridge. I used to go there at night to the Thoreau Club. Now I go during the day, and it's a different environment during the day. It's also, you know, there's a lot more tennis players and aquatics people and, you know, fitness people. And there's also, during the summer, they open the pool up. People can just join for the summer, like families or whatever. And the parking, you know, is a lot busier than it may be at night. So if you're gonna take a look at what the Thoreau Club does, you know, please take that into consideration.
Yeah, so the planning board is not involved in that application. That's a comprehensive permit through the zoning board of appeals.
Oh, okay,
So, yeah, so that has nothing to do with the zoning bylaw and what the planning board's doing. That is, you know, through the comprehensive permit and the applicant specifically requesting a waiver to the current parking requirements. So that's the conversation that the Board of Appeals is having through that process.
okay. Yeah, I guess my point was there's big developments coming, and I think Rob's math was on Nauvoo or Forest Ridge or some of the big ones that, you know, it was a 22% reduction in parking, which is significant, right? When you scale out the development. So, you know, with MCI coming down the path, that's a lot of development, right? I'm guessing, I don't know, but they want to.
We don't know. We don't
Right,
know.
but I'm just saying, like, you know, take that into your
Yep.
calculations. I would view it more on what is this going to happen if somebody's going to build something large? What's the impact versus something small? Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Okay, everybody,
Sounds good.
we done?
We're done.
Done with that.
Oh,
Um,
do you have any reports? Oh, we should hear an MCI report.
Sure. The request for proposals has been issued. And, to date, 35 requests for copies of, the request have been submitted.
Request for the request.
Request for the requests. So obviously, there's a lot of interest on the part of developers,
Well-
or planners,
Yeah, consultants
consultants.
to assist the town.
consultants, To assist the
Oh,
town
okay.
with all of, the funding that we have now in line to receive from the state. So, yeah, things are moving forward, and,
So the RFP is, was issued, for a single, I'm looking to have a single consultant to assist with the visioning process, and then the development of the zoning. So I imagine as individual, citizens, I'll be part of, that whole visioning, conversation. And then as the planning board, I would imagine the, select board and the MCI advisory board will be looking to the planning board for input, during that process, but I'm not sure. That's my guess.
What's the timeline on selecting consultant, you know?
I believe there will be a period where questions can be given to the advisory board, answers provided to potential consultants, and then final submissions, I think, are the 27th of January. And then there'll be review of those and selection somewhere around the 11th of February, so it's gonna
Okay,
move.
coming up, yeah.
I don't know, those numbers, I mean, those
And who makes
dates
the selection, the board? Or the Select board?
there's
Yeah,
a,
the RFP closes the 27th of January.
Okay,
Um.
Is
And
this being handled through DCAM or?
no.
no, it's being handled through the town.
Okay,
Town.
thank God.
Um, So after the 27th, then, you know, I do believe everybody is like, on board to review proposals. You know, and then, do interviews and make a selection in a fairly compressed timeframe.
Thank you. Any other reports the planning board have a report to make?
No, I can, tell you that, we are, putting together our draft reports for the annual town report. So, more than likely, you know, I'll draft the report. And I don't know if the drafts are due, you know, this Friday. You know, so I will more than likely, give it to Andrew, to review, and you can send it to either, you know, Sue or Linda to do edits. I can't send it to.
Yeah.
Well, you're seven,
7,
so I could send it to 3 of you. Okay,
I'm happy.
Love you.
okay. But it, you know, it goes through, you know, what you did for
Right.
the year, so it's fairly simple, but that's what we're working
And
on.
then I didn't listen to all of the select boards meeting yesterday, but did they change our?
No, so the reason, Andrew is not here, is that he has the flu. And texted me, he was gonna Zoom in, but came back from the doctors and he probably has pneumonia on top of it. So he did not go, last night. I talked to Mark and Mark wasn't available, so, it's being postponed. I'm not sure, when it's going to be postponed. I guess there's other considerations about the warrant, the town meeting schedule being discussed, so, I don't know.
And then did we submit MBTA?
Of course.
Of course, I just
Oh.
didn't hear anything.
Yeah, so that's my update. No, it went in, that Friday, so did not wait the last day.
Okay,
So it did get, submitted. I did let
Thank
the town, manager, and I did discuss, cause there's the question about the contiguous district.
Mhm.
So, filled it out, and it is, you know, based on conversations and with town council. Yes, we feel we meet the single contiguous district requirement. So I imagine that will come up, but, to Sue's point, you know, I think once, they do review that and raise that, is when we will, have town council respond. And I'm gonna look into this. I am not sure there is, another community, that is a commuter rail community
That has two. commuter
with
rail stations.
2 commuter rail stations.
Um,
I know-
Andover.
No, but.
They have bus routes though in Andover, don't they?
That'd be north.
They have I believe they have 2 stops
Technically.
on the commuter rail line. I
Right,
think Andover.
But they also have bus.
But I
is what
think
you're
they
saying,
have
is they have like
also have a
a,
bus.
I think they have bus service
I don't know.
in Andover, so that's what I have to check,
Okay.
because, you know, if they're, a rail community or a transit community. You know, cause there are communities that are transit communities, you know, as you go into town, that have 2 commuter rail stops, but they have bus
they
service as
do
well.
have bus service in Andover.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's different. You know, once
Okay.
again, that's different. I am not sure there's another commuter rail community that has 2 commuter rail stops.
I'm looking through the lines right now. Let's see.
But that's so that's, you know, but anyway, so no, yes, it definitely got
Okay.
submitted.
Concord is the only community that has 2 commuter rail stations.
Well,
Thank
wait
you.
a second, what about Weston, which with its Kendall Green, nothing ever stops there, and its Silver Hill, really nothing ever stops there.
Not listed on this. Does it say it has 2?
Mishawam.
But I
Woburn.
even think Woburn has bus service.
I think you're right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the,
Woburn definitely has
Yeah.
bus service.
I'm just saying.
So,
Anyway, we'll see what happens. See what
Very
happens.
unique
Yeah.
and.
yes.
right.
Either way.
Any other committee reports? Liaison reports? No? We all done then? Is there anything else that you have to say?
No,
Then I'm gonna close this meeting then.